Cherubs, this is Francis Bacon's triptych of 1973. Now, usually when I talk about Francis Bacon on this channel, I'm talking about that guy that helped to define the scientific method back in the 17th century, but I'm kind of into 20th century art these days, so I'm mixing it up. Back to the painting. It's a fairly disturbing piece, and one of a series of triptychs composed after the suicide of the artist's romantic partner. Now, even if you didn't know that bit of biographical information, you could certainly understand that this is highly emotional. It's discomforting, scared, anxious, severe, full of pain. And I could keep on going listing descripting words here, but I'm not going to because that would simply take too long. And that brings me to the topic of this video. Art can be much better than language at communicating emotion. Francis Bacon communicates the complexity of a human emotional experience in these three paintings. It would take a writer pages to do that. In fact, there's a whole branch of art theory that focuses on this ability of art to communicate emotion, and it's called the expressive theory of art. Like most theory, I could date this one back to Plato, who felt that the human soul was split into three parts. The mechanical part that takes care of everyday life functions, the reasonable part that uses logic, and the emotional part that drives our passions. Plato thought that the ideal human society would allow the reasonable part of the soul to take over at the expense of the emotional bit. And this is one of the reasons he found no need to include poets in his ideal republic. Poets appeal to emotion, so for him, because art expresses emotion, it doesn't have much value. He tossed it out. But the most influential text in the expressive theory comes from the Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy. His essay, What is Art?, claims that the activity of art is to evoke in oneself a feeling one has once experienced, and having evoked it in oneself, then by means of movements, lines, colors, sounds, and forms, expressed in words, so to transmit this feeling that others experience the same feeling. So for Tolstoy, the end result of art is to inspire emotion in the perceptor, which is quite different from the mimetic theory of art, which values the representation of a physical reality. I think it's fair to say that abstract expressionists like Judith Godwin fit this expressive theory of art pretty well, with paintings like Echoes 2 in 1954, which refuses to let the viewer find a pattern or human form, and that communicates a kind of frantic anxiety beyond language. In fact, Godwin explained her work by saying that she tries to emphasize what is important by painting the image of my feelings on canvas, to accept my feelings honestly and not falsely. Or take Helen Frankenthaler or Joan Mitchell paintings like these. These works aren't trying to imitate the physical world, nor are they trying to outline some cognitive argument or appeal to reason or morality. They do, however, work pretty well as a deposit of an emotional experience. If they don't do much for you in this video, I suggest you hunt down those works by these artists in person, because trust me, you'll have feelings. Critics of the expressive theory of art, though, will say that surely these artists experienced many emotions during the time it takes to complete a work. They weren't in a single state of mind for the entire production, so to view the activity of art in this way is reductive and simplistic. Emotions are effervescent, they're fleeting. To think somebody could reliably call upon the same mental state repeatedly over months or even years is just silly. So to evoke emotion continuously, as Tolstoy implied, and communicate it to others, that's simply not a productive way of thinking about art. But a defender of this theory may counter with Sigmund Freud's view of art as sublimation. A person making this argument might take something like O'Keeffe's flower paintings and interpret them as vaginal or as some latent form of penis envy, but that popular undergraduate interpretation is now widely understood to be sexist and pushed by male critics and at times her own husband. That aside, the analytic approach of explaining art through the lens of the unconscious desires would explain how an artist could maintain an emotion for a sustained period of time. It's a bubbling up of a consistently repressed emotion. But in addition to that claim being untestable, the theory also seems limiting. Art surely isn't just about emotion, and having a success of a work be dependent on its ability to express emotion certainly shouldn't be the full measure of its worth. In fact, some art purposefully attempts to remove emotion. Take Andy Warhol's images of tragedy, repeated over and over until the emotional impact of the image is gone, or his repeated images of Marilyn Monroe, which is a comment on the numbing effect of repetition of images on our emotion. Sure, that subject matter can be perceived as emotional, but the work itself has an argument about the impact of visual media and its ability to remove emotion through repetition. It's not attempting to leverage or communicate emotion. Or what about didactic art? The kind of art that tries to teach an ethical lesson. Something like Martha Rosler's collage, Cleaning the Drapes, which calls our attention to violence and war using familiar imagery and aesthetics of a magazine advertisement. This image addresses our apathy and could call us to action. And think about most religious art. It's trying to inspire devotion or communicate a religious narrative. These examples try to instruct the perceptor towards a particular view of the world or to a particular moral understanding. The expression of emotion is involved, sure. This kind of art will often try to leverage emotion in service of the moral lesson, but the communication and transfer of the artist's emotion is certainly not the point. It's just a tool. In fact, in those cases, the point is more to expand a shared social responsibility within a community of people more than it is an emotional transfer of an individual artist's experience to the viewer. On that note, though, I feel I should mention that there is at least one theory of art, formalism, that would argue that those great paintings which tell a story to communicate a moral lesson aren't necessarily art at all. Formalists, like Clive Bell, argue that great art communicates a particular type of emotion, aesthetic emotion, and that this is communicated exclusively through the form of a painting, shape, color, composition, etc. If the emotion evoked by a work of art is through narrative rather than form, well then, for him, that's just not art at all. When discussing narrative or didactic paintings, he says, "To this class belongs what I call descriptive paintings. That is, paintings in which form are used not as objects of emotion, but as a means of suggesting emotion or conveying information. According to my hypothesis, they are not works of art." So, for Clive Bell, a work of art needs to have an aesthetic form, and lacking that, regardless of the emotional transfer, it's not art. Alright, let's return to where we started, the Francis Bacon triptych. We can see that it does tell an emotional story, but it also has great form and use of color. The critic Mary Abb once said of it, "Backgrounds of boudoir pink, persimmon, lilac, and aqua combine with the calligraphic grace of his fleshy figures in an image of stylized elegance." In other, far inferior words, the use of color and composition creates an aesthetic emotion greater than and in addition to the narrative emotion. The implication for formalists is that if it didn't have this great formal structure, it wouldn't be art. I'm not sure I'd go that far, and I can't fully let go of the expressive theory of art. Art does an incomparable job of communicating the complexity of human experience, which is so integrally tied up with emotion. I've always liked, for instance, the anecdote of the choreographer Isadora Duncan, who was instrumental in developing modern dance in the early 20th century. After being asked about the meaning of her choreography, she responded, "If I could tell you the meaning, I wouldn't have to dance it." Emotions are complicated to understand or communicate, yet the urge to communicate and share them is a persistent and meaningful part about being human. Art's ability to do that is a large part of our drive to create and experience it. So Isadora Duncan and Francis Bacon need these emotions to be understood by dancing them and painting them, rather than by using language. I get that there's more to art than just emotion, but certainly the expression of emotion is part of it. Right? I don't know, but I'd love to hear what you all think about the expressive theory of art. What role does emotion play in the creation or perception of an artwork? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching.